Have you ever heard of the circle of trust? A circle of trust is a group of people, maybe within a closed little circuit, that you involve and invite in that you trust. It's great for those who are inside of the circle, but those outside of the circle, it can be extremely judgmental and extremely difficult to handle. Religion and church, in many ways, can create its own little circle of trust. You know, one that has to act a certain way, talk a certain way, dress a certain way, behave a certain way, or you're outside of the circle. But once inside of the circle, you feel this sense of acceptance and love and trust, and it's great. But the tendency is now when you're inside the circle to point the fingers at those outside of that circle and easily judge them. Jesus entered a time when this was very much the case, and he ended up at one story in Matthew chapter 9, where he met somebody that was generally considered outside of everyone's circle of trust. It was Matthew himself. It says in Matthew 9, verse 9, that Jesus went on from there and he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Now, tax collectors were definitely outside of everyone's circle of trust. They were the lowest of the low. They were Jews who worked for Rome, the enemy, and got rich doing it. Collecting Rome's taxes on behalf, as a Jew, from the Jews was definitely not welcomed and definitely outside, broke everyone's trust. It was the ultimate betrayal. And they would be comparable to what a 20-year-old punk standing outside a junior high school selling drugs as candy to somebody else. I mean, totally outside of the circle of trust. Yet Jesus' response to Matthew was incredible. In the next verse 10, he says, "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. I mean, Jesus said, "Follow me." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, Matthew, you've got to do these things and this, and in order to get into my circle of trust, you have to behave this way, you have to dress this way, you have to change the way you're doing, you have to act this way, or you just quit doing what you're doing, and you can then follow me. He just said, follow. Religion says, change, you can join us. Jesus says, join me and you will change. I mean, imagine what Peter and John were thinking. Jesus' followers at that time, they're thinking, whoa, Jesus. You can't ask him to follow us like you asked us to follow you. I mean, this is a tax collector. This is Matthew. I don't want to be seen with this guy. Never mind you being seen with this guy. Jesus, this is just not right. Yet, Jesus even went a little bit further. Right after he says to Matthew, follow me, Jesus says, next verse is, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. You know what I love about that verse is that it actually segregates sinners from tax collectors. I mean, sinners didn't even want to be identified with the tax collectors. These guys were way outside of the circle of trust. But the thing about this verse that kind of disturbs me, probably more than many verses in the Bible, is that Jesus seemed comfortable with people who were nothing like him. And what's more disturbing is that people who were nothing like Jesus seemed really comfortable with him. See, Jesus invited Matthew to follow him. Not only that, but he went over to his house for dinner. And when the Pharisees saw this, the verse says, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why does he even have a meal with them? Why is he even seen with them? They are way outside the circle of trust. Why in the world would Jesus even eat with them? And Jesus' response was, and hearing this, he said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Now, he says this at the dinner table with the tax collector and the sinners. And he says, these guys are saying, why is he even eating this? And he says, right in the presence of all of them, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, this need the sick. And I can imagine the guys going, whoa, he just called us sick. High five. I mean, Jesus just in front of them called them sick, and they knew where they were at. They knew they were outside of the circle of trust, yet for some reason, they loved Jesus. And Jesus went on and he said, but go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. In other words, Jesus says, I didn't even come to call those inside the circle of trust. My purpose was actually to reach outside of the circle of trust, to reach outside of the typical boundaries, not for the righteous, not just to reach the righteous, but to reach those outside, to call the sinners. I think we can take a lesson from this, from Jesus. What's amazing about this story is that Jesus, he said, follow before you believe. And yet it challenges me, and I'm wondering, how often do I, as a pastor, or does my church, how many times do we ask people to change before they're welcomed into our circle of trust? How am I one-on-one? How do I accept people who are different, who look different, who dress different, who talk different, who might not have the same system of beliefs as I do? Am I loving and accepting? Or am I asking them to change who they are, their behavior, before I will accept them? Jesus didn't do that. Jesus accepted them, and just being around him, they did change, but he accepted them before he changed. I think we dare not become a church that is content to gather people, to believe the right things and behave the right way, and stop right there. I think what's amazing about the story is that being a sinner doesn't disqualify you from following Jesus. In fact, if you read the stories of Jesus throughout the Gospels, it seems to be a prerequisite. Jesus reached outside of that, and in fact, he says right here, it's the people that I'm going to reach are those outside the circles of trust. Those are being the sinners. And that's good news for you. That's good news for me, that we're welcome as we are, accepted as we are. You're loved and accepted as you are by Jesus before you change. It's amazing. So how do we do this in return? We need to be just like Jesus did and love and accept those as they are before they change. And I just think that the gospel is powerful enough that if they meet Jesus, and my Jesus is powerful enough, if they meet Jesus, they will change eventually to become more like him. I'm hoping to change, become more like him, but I'm glad that I was accepted and loved before I changed.